What is truth? Is it a fact etched in stone for all to see? Or is it something more fragile, something that can be bent, buried, or silenced? In an age of information, we believe every secret will eventually come to light. We trust that justice, however slow, will find its way. But what happens when the story isn't about finding the truth, but about controlling its arrival? This is the story of the Epstein Files, a story that held the world's attention, promising to unmask a web of power, influence, and darkness. It began not with a whisper, but with a roar. Names were dropped, connections were alleged, and the public's imagination ignited. We were told that sealed documents held the key, that a massive unsealing would finally deliver the answers we had been waiting for. The expectation was immense, a global countdown to a moment of reckoning. We leaned in, waiting for the final, damning revelation. We believed the silence was about to be broken, but we were wrong. This isn't a story about what was revealed. It's a story about what wasn't, and why the silence that followed became the most powerful verdict of all. The initial shockwave was seismic. News channels across the globe buzzed with a singular focus. Headlines screamed from every screen, each one promising a deeper dive into the abyss. The names, the places, the sheer scale of the allegations. It was a narrative that seemed torn from a dark thriller, yet it was unfolding in our reality. Public outrage was immediate and unified. From online forums to city streets, a collective demand for transparency echoed. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a moral crisis that seemed to touch the very foundations of our institutions. People weren't just angry. They were invested. They felt a stake in the outcome, a need to see justice done, not for revenge, but for validation that the system could still hold the powerful accountable. In response, the wheels of justice appeared to turn. Official investigations were announced with solemn press conferences. Spokespeople assured the public that no stone would be left unturned. The narrative was carefully crafted. The system was working. Trust was the currency of the moment, and it was being generously offered. We saw images of investigators, courthouses, and legal teams poring over evidence. It created a powerful illusion of progress, a sense that we were on a clear path toward resolution. Every news report, every legal analyst's commentary, reinforced the idea that the unsealing of the files was the climax we were all building towards. The world was watching, convinced that the final act was about to begin, and that the truth, in its entirety, was finally within reach. The silence, we were told, was just the quiet before the storm. Then the tempo began to change. The frantic pace of breaking news slowed to a crawl. The promised dates for disclosure came and went, replaced by new, more distant ones. The reasons given were complex, wrapped in impenetrable legal jargon, ongoing reviews, privacy concerns, procedural delays. Each explanation felt plausible on its own, but together they formed a pattern. The storm wasn't arriving. Instead, a fog was rolling in. The once clear path to truth became a labyrinth of legal motions and sealed dockets. Visuals of justice in action were replaced by symbols of stasis. Clocks ticking in empty hallways, stacks of files bound in red tape, courthouse doors swinging shut. The story shifted from a sprint to a marathon, and with it, the nature of public attention began to change. Time, the great healer, is also the great diffuser of outrage. As weeks turned into months, the story began to lose its grip on the public consciousness. The constant high-stakes tension was unsustainable. Other crises, other headlines demanded our attention. The case didn't disappear, but it moved from the front page to the back pages, from the lead story to a brief mention. The global spotlight, once intensely focused, began to dim and scatter. The silence was no longer the prelude to a revelation. It was becoming the story itself. The sealed documents, once symbols of impending truth, now represented a truth deferred, perhaps indefinitely. The sense of unease returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't the suspense of waiting for a bomb to go off. It was the creeping dread of realizing it may have already been disarmed, quietly, while no one was looking. This is the point where the true nature of power reveals itself. We were looking for a conspiracy, a cover-up, a shadowy group actively destroying evidence. We expected to find villains burning files in a basement, but the reality was far more sophisticated and far more unsettling. The strategy wasn't to erase the truth, it was to manage it, to outlast it. The focus of our story must shift from the individuals named in the files to the system that contained them. It's a system that understands a fundamental weakness of the modern world: our attention span. It knows that outrage is a fire that needs constant fuel. Without it, it burns out. The twist isn't that the truth was hidden, it's that it was weaponized through delay. Think of it not as a locked door, but as a time-release capsule. By controlling the flow of information, by releasing it in drips and drabs, sanitized and redacted, the system defanged the narrative. The immense singular power of the initial revelation was deliberately fractured into 1,000 tiny, manageable pieces. Each piece, released out of context and separated by time, lacked the power to reignite the original fire. The silence wasn't an act of omission, it was an act of commission. It was the tool used to transform a moment of potential revolution into a drawn-out administrative process. The final verdict wasn't delivered by a judge in a courtroom. It was delivered by the slow, grinding passage of time, engineered by a system designed to protect itself. The silence, in the end, was the strategy. So, where does that leave us? With a collection of names, redacted documents, and a profound sense of incompletion. It can feel like a defeat, like proof that the powerful are truly untouchable. But that is the final illusion we must resist. The core message of this entire saga is not that power erases truth. It is that power controls its timing. The truth of the Epstein Files was not destroyed. It was merely delayed, diluted, and managed until its impact could be absorbed without consequence. The system didn't break the story, it simply weathered it. This understanding is crucial. It forces us to look beyond the headlines and question the process itself. It teaches us that in the fight for accountability, the greatest obstacle isn't always a lie. Sometimes, it's a strategically deployed silence. The goal is to make us forget, to make us move on, to accept the quiet as the end of the story. But it is not the end. The facts remain, archived and waiting. The responsibility now falls to us, to remember, to continue asking the questions, even when the world has gone quiet. To understand that the absence of noise is not the absence of truth. True power lies not in shouting the loudest, but in refusing to be silenced. We must remain aware, remain vigilant, and never mistake a pause for a period. Because in the long arc of history, the truth doesn't just wait, it endures. For more dark psychological documentaries about power and silence, subscribe to Obscure Diaries.